Have you ever noticed how the world changes after midnight? The streets that once bustled with noise and life suddenly grow silent. Houses that seemed warm and welcoming during the day stand still and empty, their windows staring out into the darkness like hollow eyes. The ticking of a clock feels louder, heavier, almost unbearable, and the sound of your own breath is the only reminder that you're not completely alone. But here's the truth. You may not be alone at all, because the darkest hours of night are when the world grows quiet, and in that silence, some of the most terrifying true events unfold. When the rest of the world is asleep, strange things awaken. Some believe it's when the veil between the living and the dead becomes thin, when shadows move freely, when whispers travel further than they should.
It was just after midnight when Daniel, a truck driver who had been on the road for nearly 12 hours, found himself cruising down a long stretch of highway in rural Nevada. The night was still, too still, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, as if the entire world has gone to sleep and left you behind. The hum of the engine was the only sound keeping him company. Occasionally, the wind howled across the desert, rattling against his side mirrors, but otherwise it was nothing but endless black road ahead and behind. Daniel rubbed his eyes, trying to push away the fatigue setting into his bones. The road seemed to stretch on forever. No cars, no gas stations, not even a flicker of light from a farmhouse, just miles of asphalt, painted lines glowing faintly in the truck's headlights. And then he saw him. Up ahead, on the side of the road, stood a man. He was dressed in dark clothing, his figure barely visible in the shadows. His head hung low and one arm was stretched out, thumb raised in the classic gesture of a hitchhiker. Daniel slowed instinctively. Something about the sight didn't sit right with him. Who in their right mind would be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? But then again, Daniel had been on the road long enough to know what desperation looked like. Maybe the man's car had broken down. Maybe he'd been stranded for hours. So Daniel pulled over. The hitchhiker climbed into the passenger seat without a word. He moved stiffly, almost mechanically, and once the door shut, a wave of cold air filled the cab. Daniel shivered and turned up the heater. "Rough night to be out here," Daniel said, trying to start a conversation. "Where you headed?" The man didn't answer. Daniel glanced at him. His face was obscured by the shadows, but what he could see made his stomach tighten. His skin looked pale, almost gray, and his eyes, there was something wrong about them. They didn't seem to focus, didn't blink. Trying to shake off his unease, Daniel cleared his throat. "I'll take you as far as the next town. Shouldn't be more than 30 miles. Still, silence. The only sound was the steady rumble of the engine.
When the Harrington family moved into their new home, they thought they had found their dream house. It was a 2-story colonial in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a big backyard for the kids and enough space for everyone to finally spread out. The first few weeks were filled with excitement, unpacking boxes, decorating rooms, and planning backyard barbecues. But then, the nights came. At first, it was subtle, a faint creak above the ceiling when everyone was heading to bed. Houses settle, they told themselves. Old wood shifts, nothing unusual. But the sounds didn't stop. Every night, somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, they heard it. The steady rhythm of footsteps moving across the attic. Not the random creaks of settling wood. No, these were deliberate, slow, heavy, measured. At first, Mr. Harrington tried to dismiss it. "Probably squirrels," he said, climbing the ladder one afternoon to inspect. But the attic was clean, empty, not a sign of pests or rodents, just boxes of holiday decorations and old furniture left behind by the previous owners. That night, the footsteps came again. This time, they were louder. He lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, his heart racing with every step. They started near one end of the attic and moved across the length of the house, stopping directly above his bedroom.
Hospitals are unsettling places, even in the daytime. The smell of disinfectant, the quiet hum of machines, the endless hallways that all look the same. But at night, hospitals become something else entirely. Empty corridors stretch on forever, lit only by the occasional flickering bulb. The silence is broken only by the distant beep of a monitor or the squeak of a rolling gurney. The atmosphere changes. Patients sleep, visitors are gone, and those who remain often say the night belongs to something unseen. For Natalie, a young nurse working her first year on the night shift, the stories about the hospital's abandoned wing had always been nothing more than rumors. Staff whispered about it. An old section of the building shut down after a fire decades ago. They said patients still wandered there long after death. But Natalie didn't believe in ghosts. That was before the night she found herself alone in that corridor. It started like any other shift. Midnight rounds, chart updates, routine checks. But around 2 a.m., the security desk called. Cameras had picked up movement in the old wing, the one that was supposed to be locked. Natalie was asked to investigate. She protested. That wing's been closed for years. The guard shrugged. Could be a homeless guy snuck in or kids messing around. Just check it out. So, flashlight in hand, Natalie made her way through the hospital. The deeper she went, the quieter it became. By the time she reached the sealed doors of the old wing, her footsteps echoed like gunshots in the silence. The doors creaked open with surprising ease. The hallway beyond was dark, the paint peeling from the walls, ceiling tiles sagging with water damage. The smell of mildew hung heavy in the air. She stepped inside. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating broken wheelchairs and rusted IV stands abandoned in corners. The floor was littered with papers, old charts that hadn't been touched in decades. And then she heard it.
There's something about 3 in the morning that unsettles people. They call it the witching hour, the time when the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. Most dismiss it as superstition, but for Daniel, that hour became a nightmare he could never forget. Daniel lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment. He was a night owl, usually up late working on his computer or watching movies. He didn't believe in ghosts, didn't scare easily, but he had a bad habit. He never locked his front door. He figured, who would bother breaking in here? It's a tiny apartment in a safe neighborhood. That carelessness would come back to haunt him. One night, around 2:45 a.m., Daniel was sitting on his couch, half asleep, when he heard something strange. At first, it sounded like the soft creak of a door hinge. Then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, careful, inside his apartment. Daniel froze, every muscle in his body tense. His TV screen flickered light across the room, but the rest of the apartment was cloaked in shadow. He whispered to himself, maybe it's the neighbors. But no, the footsteps were too close, too clear. They were coming from his hallway. He grabbed his phone, but the screen light betrayed him, glowing in the dark. The footsteps stopped. Whoever or whatever was there had noticed him. For what felt like an eternity, silence hung in the air. Then, a whisper, low, raspy, from the hallway. Daniel! His blood ran cold. No one should know his name. He tried to call out, to demand who was there, but his voice caught in his throat. He stood, slowly, heart hammering, and picked up the nearest object for protection, a glass bottle from the table. The hallway stretched out in front of him, black and empty. He forced himself to take a step forward. "Who's there?" he managed to say, his voice trembling. No answer. He inched closer to his bedroom door, the shadows seeming to thicken the further he went. And then he heard it again. Daniel. This time it came from inside his bedroom. His chest tightened. His mind screamed at him to run, to get out of the apartment, but his legs carried him forward. He pushed the door open with a trembling hand. The room was dark, silent, and empty. He exhaled shakily, almost laughing at himself. "I'm losing it," he whispered. But then he noticed something. The closet door was slightly open, just enough to see darkness inside. Daniel's pulse spiked. He stared at the gap, every instinct telling him not to move. Yet slowly, he reached out and pushed the door wide open. The closet was empty, or at least it should have been, because from the very back, deep in the shadows, two pale hands shot forward, slamming against the doorframe. Daniel stumbled back, dropping the bottle. His scream caught in his throat as a figure began to crawl out of the darkness, thin, emaciated, its face hidden in the shadows, whispering his name again and again. "Daniel! Daniel!" He bolted. He didn't think, didn't look back. He sprinted through the apartment, flung open the front door, and ran barefoot into the street. Neighbors found him outside minutes later, trembling and incoherent, insisting someone had been in his apartment. Police searched every corner, the closet, the bedroom, the hallway. Nothing. No forced entry, no signs of anyone. But Daniel swore he hadn't imagined it. The strangest detail? When officers checked the front door, it was locked from the inside. To this day, Daniel refuses to live alone, and he always makes sure the doors are locked. But sometimes, late at night, when he's drifting off to sleep, he swears he hears it again. A whisper in the dark. Daniel.
Driving at night can be peaceful. The roads are empty, the world is quiet, and the hum of the engine becomes almost hypnotic. But the darkness hides things. And sometimes what you see on those lonely highways isn't what it seems. For Marcus, a long-haul truck driver, nighttime driving was nothing new. He'd been on the road for 15 years, crossing state lines while most of the world slept. He thought he'd seen it all. Strange accidents, reckless drivers, even the occasional coyote darting across the asphalt. But one night in rural Arizona, Marcus encountered something he could never explain. It was just past 2 a.m., the desert stretching endlessly on either side of the road. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty pavement. The radio played softly, keeping him awake. That's when he saw her. A woman standing at the side of the road. She wore a pale dress, her long hair blowing in the desert wind. She lifted one arm, thumb out, asking for a ride. Marcus slowed instinctively. Hitchhikers weren't uncommon, but something about her gave him pause. Still, it was dangerous to leave someone stranded in the middle of nowhere at night. He pulled over. The woman approached silently, her face shadowed by the headlights. When she climbed into the passenger seat, Marcus noticed how cold the air suddenly felt. She didn't say much, just whispered, "Thank you." They drove in silence for a while. Marcus tried making small talk. "Where are you headed?" The woman's voice was soft, almost fragile. "Just down the road?" Her answers were short, vague, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching him, even though her eyes were fixed straight ahead. Finally, after several minutes, she spoke again. "You should be careful tonight." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" She turned her head slowly, her eyes finally meeting his. They were pale, almost gray, and full of something he couldn't place. Fear, maybe. "There's danger on this road." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, she pointed ahead. "Pull over here." He slowed the truck, scanning the road. There was nothing, just desert, sand, and an old dirt path leading into darkness. "This is my stop," she said. He hesitated. "You sure? There's nothing out here." The woman smiled faintly. "I'll be fine, but remember what I told you. Be careful." She stepped down from the truck, her figure vanishing into the night. Marcus waited a few moments, then shook his head and drove on. 20 minutes later, he came around a bend and slammed on the brakes. A massive 18-wheeler had jackknifed across the road, blocking both lanes. The accident looked recent. If Marcus hadn't stopped earlier, if he hadn't slowed down, he would have been right in the middle of it. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. He pulled over, heart pounding, and reached for his phone to call 911. That's when he noticed something chilling. In the passenger seat, where the woman had been sitting, was a single scrap of fabric, pale, torn, and stained with something dark. Marcus never saw the woman again, but to this day, he swears she saved his life. Truckers who hear his story nod knowingly. They say the desert highways are haunted by spirits of those who died on the road, some seeking revenge, others offering warnings. And sometimes, late at night, when the road is empty and the air grows cold, Marcus thinks back to that pale figure and wonders, was she ever really there?
Phones are supposed to connect us, to bring voices from far away right into our ears. But sometimes those voices don't belong. And sometimes the call comes long after the caller is gone. For Emily, the nightmare began with a single late-night ring. It was 3:12 a.m. when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Half asleep, she reached for it, squinting at the screen. The caller ID froze her blood. It was her best friend, Sarah. But Sarah had died 3 weeks earlier. Emily sat upright, her chest tight. This had to be some kind of sick joke, someone spoofing the number. With trembling fingers, she answered. At first, there was only static, a faint hiss that filled her ear. She whispered, "Hello?" And then Sarah's voice, faint, distant, almost like it was underwater. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah? How is this possible?" The line crackled, breaking into fragments. "Don't go tomorrow." Then silence. The call ended on its own. Emily sat in the darkness, phone clutched tight in her shaking hands. She barely slept that night, her mind racing. She tried to convince herself it was a dream or a cruel prank, but the voice had been too real, too familiar. The next morning, Emily almost ignored the warning. She had plans to take the highway to visit her parents, but Sarah's words echoed in her mind. "Don't go tomorrow." Against all logic, she canceled the trip, stayed home. That afternoon, news broke of a massive pileup on the very stretch of highway she would have been driving. Multiple fatalities. The images on the screen made her stomach twist. She should have felt relieved, grateful. But instead, a deeper fear settled in. Because if Sarah's call had saved her, what else could it mean? That night, the phone rang again. 3:12 a.m., the same number. Her heart pounded as she answered. This time, Sarah's voice was clearer. "Em, listen, they're coming." "Who?" Emily begged. "Sarah, who's coming?" The line distorted, breaking with static and strange whispers in the background, like voices overlapping, dozens of them all murmuring at once. And then, in a sharp, urgent tone, "Don't open the door!" The call dropped. Emily sat frozen, staring at the locked front door across the room. She tried to calm herself, to breathe, to convince herself she was imagining it. That's when she heard it. A knock. Soft, deliberate, at the door. Her blood ran cold. She stayed still, not daring to move. The knock came again, louder this time. Then a voice, not Sarah's, a man's voice, calm, too calm. "Emily, let me in." She covered her mouth to keep from screaming. She hadn't told anyone she was home. No one should even know her name. The knocking turned to pounding. The handle rattled. Emily stumbled back, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Then, mercifully, silence. She waited hours before moving. The sun had already risen when she finally dared to approach the door. On the wood, scratched deep into the surface, were words that made her legs nearly give out. "Next time, you'll answer." Emily called the police, but they found no footprints, no signs of forced entry. Whoever or whatever it was had vanished. That night, at 3:12 a.m., her phone rang again. She didn't answer. It kept ringing and ringing and ringing until it finally stopped. The night is supposed to be a time of rest, a time when the world sleeps and silence brings peace. But if these stories have taught us anything, it's that the darkest hours are rarely empty. They're filled with footsteps that shouldn't exist, whispers from voices that don't belong, warnings from strangers or loved ones long gone, and shadows that wait patiently for us to open the door. Think back for a moment. The Harrington family forced to flee their dream home because something lived above them, watching. Natalie, the nurse, hearing the wheels of a long-dead patient echoing down abandoned corridors. Daniel, haunted by the midnight visitor who knew his name. Marcus, saved by a hitchhiker who might never have been alive. And Emily, whose phone connected her to a voice that should never have been able to call again. Each story is different, but they all share one thing: the night hides more than darkness. As you lay in bed tonight, remember, the silence around you isn't always empty. The creak in the ceiling, the flicker of a shadow, the phone that rings when no one should be calling, they might all be signs that the veil is thinner than you think. And if in the middle of the night you hear someone whisper your name, don't answer, because some visitors don't come from this world. Thank you for staying with me through this hour of terror. If you made it this far, you're braver than most, but the night holds endless stories, and this is only the beginning. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell because the next story might just be the one that keeps you up tonight. Until then, sleep well if you can.